Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. So, just when you thought that, it couldn't possibly get worse for them, that's exactly what happens. Another bombshell drops. We've heard the narrative. Democrats have been trying to ride this narrative wave for a good almost 4 years, and I don't exactly blame them. The whole January insurrection narrative. But in the early days, I get it. But now, after everything we've seen, Democrats ought to get the message, right? Stop beating the dead horse. Kamala Harris during the debate said this.
I was there. And on that day, the President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital.
Donald Trump incited a mob. He led them on a horse up the Capitol steps. That's the narrative web they've attempted to spin, but that narrative has already collapsed, and now, it's beyond collapsed. Donald Trump's #1 best defense, well, actually probably his second best defense, his first best defense, is the fact that he's literally on the record telling people to go home, and prior to the event telling people to be peaceful and peaceably assemble. But his second best defense is the issue relating to National Guard. The Trump team has always alleged that they requested National Guard presence to protect the Capitol on that day, and that it was denied by Nancy Pelosi and her Sergeant-at-Arms. Previously, I think roughly 2 years ago, we covered text message evidence suggesting this to be the case, but Democrats have vehemently denied this, and they've claimed that Donald Trump never actually requested for any National Guard presence. Well, I guess that denial today ends, as an official House Administration Subcommittee on Oversight transcript document reveals that Donald Trump did in fact request these troops, and so this, plus the Nancy Pelosi tapes, the text messages, and everything, it's pretty much over. It is done and sealed on this issue of insurrection. Let's have a conversation about this. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright folks, so I know a little bit of a wordy intro. Some people are probably spazzing in the comments, but look, I just gotta lay down the groundwork, and not everybody's always caught up on everything, so laying the dynamics important here. Now we know exactly what we're going into with this document. House Administration Subcommittee on Oversight releases this. The first couple pages has a bunch of quotes that are kind of setting the theme. Basically, you got a bunch of people from the DC National Guard saying stuff like they were ready to go and they just couldn't understand why they were still sitting there, literally sitting on a bus just waiting to drive to the Capitol and do the best they could to support Capitol Police. Quote, the DC Guard could have gone in right away, but the Secretary of Army did not give us approval. There was concern about being anywhere near the Capitol because of the perception that the military would be involved and that there would be militarization of the electoral process. So just the general question from a lot of these people at the National Guard in DC, not understanding why they were sidelined that day. And then we've got this quote here from General Mark Milley. Of course, you guys know who that is. Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. This man, by the way, not a Trump supporter. Frankly, I'd classify him as a Trump hater, but we've got a quote from him on January 3rd, 2021. The president just says, hey, look at this. There's going to be a large amount of protesters here on the 6th. Make sure that you have sufficient National Guard or soldiers to make sure it's a safe event. POTUS said, hey, I don't care if you use guard, soldiers, active duty soldiers, do whatever you have to do, just make sure it's safe. Holy frickin' moly. Now, this is an official release. And if it's correct, then essentially you see 3 days prior, General Mark Milley was essentially told by the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, to deploy the National Guard, to make sure that the National Guard was present on that day. And they weren't. And that's really interesting considering Mark Milley's history with undermining Donald Trump's presidential authority. It really begs the question. We know from some of the books written by left-wing authors that Mark Milley at the time was reportedly reassuring military and political leaders, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi, that the military would not get involved in domestic political disputes or follow any illegal orders from Donald Trump. In some conversations, Pelosi expressed her concern directly to Milley that Trump was crazy and might try to use the military to cling to power. Milley reportedly told her that checks were in place to prevent such an outcome. We already have confirmation that Mark Milley was working with Nancy Pelosi. Their intent, which was essentially confirmed from DC National Guardsmen describing what happened on the day, they didn't want to appear to militarize the election process. In other words, they didn't deploy the National Guard for either of two reasons. Either to stage this whole event under the premise that Donald Trump is dangerous, or because they're just Trump deranged and crazy and literally believed that Donald Trump would try to use the military to launch a coup, and so they denied his orders as commander-in-chief, and their denial, their refusal to follow the chain of command, led to the events on that day, a defenseless Capitol. You know, we have so many clips of Nancy Pelosi behind the scenes.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
No, that is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more. Calling the National Guard now should have been here to start out. Has totally failed. And we've got to take some responsibility for not holding the security accountable for what could have happened.
Where's the National Guard, they ask. Nancy Pelosi even says, I'm responsible. Yeah, she literally was. Nancy Pelosi and her Sergeant-at-Arms, the House Sergeant-at-Arms, were responsible for Capitol security. And the claim is that they denied National Guard presence on that day. What's the reason behind that? That's the question to ask. They've spent the last 4 years blaming Donald Trump. But Donald Trump apparently here now is on the record telling people to go home. And it's now also confirmed, or at least light confirmed, that he requested National Guard presence on that day because it was going to be huge. You know, just make it make sense. That's all I'm asking for. And obviously nothing the left is saying makes any sense. You know, Nancy Pelosi walking around with a film crew on that day doesn't make any sense. Blaming Donald Trump for everything obviously doesn't make any sense. Calling it an insurrection doesn't make any sense. Calling it a violent attempted overthrow of government when people were walking through as if it was a field trip, walking in orderly lines, respecting the red velvet rope. You know, the worst crimes we saw were broken windows, vandalizing offices, and I think there was a broken bench. You know, that was a photo that a lot of people at the time were posting to show the damage at the Capitol. I mean, I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but what I am saying is it doesn't equate to insurrection. Vandalism, riot, sure, but that was expected. That was the intel, and Donald Trump knew the risk was there and he called for National Guard troops, and those National Guard troops were withheld, possibly by Mark Milley and Nancy Pelosi. I mean, that's crazy. It's like the Russia thing. They went on and on and on about Trump, Russia, and we were the crazies because we thought otherwise. And now the same thing on this whole insurrection narrative. The media spun its web for 4 years. We said no, and it turns out that we were right once again. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.